It's one of the most extraordinary moments in Britain's history. Prime Minister Boris Johnson refusing calls from his own cabinet to resign. Nine's Brett McLeod is outside the Prime Minister's residence. Brett, the Queen could be dragged into this mess.
Yeah, this is the site of one of the highest wind speeds ever recorded by man.
Arson could be the cause of a fire at the Sydney home of controversial comedian, commentator and YouTuber Friendly Geordies.
Supine protoplasmic invertebrate jellies.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
Right. Welcome back to episode 12 of the Fence Sitters podcast. I'm here, as always, with Will. I am Tiago. Will is in the lovely nation of France at the moment, living it up a little bit rurally. How are you doing, Will?
I'm very good, Tiago. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm in 45 minutes south of Paris at the moment, in the lovely little village of Étampes. Well, it's more of a town, really. And for those who are interested in history, it was kind of the halfway point between the major traveling road of Paris and Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where Étampes came from, in regards to a kind of a staging post in between those two big cities. So lovely little place, lovely little churches and town squares and markets and everything. It's very nice. But yes, anyway, onwards and upwards, we have a whole lot of stuff to talk about today. We've got the fascinating Australian budget.
Oh.
We have the G7 summit, which occurred recently. Ron DeSantis, it's all here. But before that, as we always do, we will discuss what we've been reading and watching and listening and devouring. So, Tiago, what have you been interested in over these last few weeks?
Well, Will, I got my major assignment out of the way, and I thought to myself, you know what? I'm going to treat myself. So I went out and
Have you bought another video game?
I have. I bought Elden Ring. I don't know if you've heard of this one, Will.
Yes.
It's probably not the wisest decision to buy right before exams, but live and let live. It's this like grand world of all these beasts and creatures, and you sort of get thrown in without any sense of direction, and you just sort of have to navigate this world, and you uncover the story through like reading notes and finding like bits of the environment. Is very different approach to storytelling than you see in most games. And I'm loving it.
That's cool.
It's very difficult, so I'm trying to just level up as much as possible before I do anything, because I'm not that skilled at these kind of games. One thing I would like to bring up about it, and this is going to get into some real nerdy stuff, but the way it runs on the PlayStation 5 is actually pretty terrible. The funniest thing, the best way to play it, and I wish I had known this before I went in, is to buy the PlayStation 4 copy and put it in the PlayStation 5, and then it runs perfectly. But if you buy the PlayStation 5 copy and you put it in the PlayStation 5, then it runs quite terribly, which is kind of unacceptable for a game that's been out for over a year. But oh well, no, it's still good, a lot of fun, time consuming. But
is it quite like kind of high medieval thing? Because all the you're more or less a knight, are you not? Is that your character?
Well, you can choose, and I'm not entirely sure of the lore, but you're this sort of group of people, right? And you can choose your background, and my background that I chose was samurai, purely because they have the most health, and I was like, that would be quite valuable. But yeah, so there's knights, samurais, wizards, and all that sort of thing. And then you're just thrown in.
Right.
And it's very medieval, dragons and trolls and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah,
all those good things.
I don't even know if I'll finish it, but I will have fun. Whatever happens.
It takes ages to finish, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I think Jet, our friend,
Yeah.
has been playing it for over 100 hours
yeah.
and he hasn't finished it. So, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Mhm.
Very good.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I have. I've known quite a few people to play that one, and it was pretty crazily big when it came out. Didn't it win a whole bunch of awards, like
Yeah, it
video
won
game awards?
Game of the Year last year, and it was like the talk of the town when
Yeah.
it first came out at the beginning of last year.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I've been avoiding it because I knew it was going to be a time sink. But you know, I gave in eventually.
Very good, very good. Well, there you go. Well, yeah. So myself, I've been going, obviously in Western Europe, been going to a lot of museums, and I'm a bit museumed out, to be quite frank, because there's only so many plaques and so many Greek pottery exhibitions one can go through. But notable museums, we've kind of, I talked about the Sigmund Freud Museum before, but now been to like big three, which was the British Museum, the like main kind of Dutch museum, which was a history of like the Netherlands more or less, and then the Louvre. And so I've got all of that, and I kind of wanted to talk about like just, I mean, kind of some real nerdy, almost boring stuff, but which really impressed me was within the Egyptian kind of section of the Louvre. There was these like kind of papyrus like manuscripts, which were really, really long, thin, and they had all these like kind of inscriptions and markings over them, and they were pretty much like what were they? They were like almost like budget kind of statistical data sheets to make sure that like the selling of grain and the purchasing of dates kind of matched up and balanced, and that budget could be met. And I don't know why, but I was just like completely blown away that like these ancient Egyptians like had this massive long kind of piece of paper with all these increment kind of details of every different section of the Nile selling specifically how much weight of grain in relation to how much grain of dates was coming in, and making sure that all matched. It was really quite impressive.
Whereabouts was that? Sorry, did you say? What museum?
That was in the Louvre.
In the Louvre, okay.
Yeah, it was in the Louvre in the Egyptian bit. And it blew me away as to how actually advanced and detailed and sophisticated these ancient societies could be, to a level like you hear about the great things like the pyramids and the Sphinx and the sarcophaguses and the battles and everything, but like to actually just see a bureaucratic kind of trade document going on for meters and meters and meters blew my mind. It really did. And then another thing was like, I didn't realize this, but obviously part of the idea is when you die, you know, you get surrounded by, you put it into your sarcophagus and you get surrounded by jewels and things that you want to be taken into your afterlife. But I found this bit where they more or less like etched the person kind of sitting down onto a wall, and then there was like in hieroglyphics they kind of almost made a menu of all the food that he'd like to take with him to the afterlife. And I think it's based on what this person liked in real life, and so there was like they used hieroglyphics to like, and you know you could see like a duck drawn into the thing. It's like, well, obviously he wants some duck in the afterlife, and then like cucumber or dates or beef or you know all these intricate kind of food things, and I mean that kind of really blew my mind as well.
Yeah.
And it was almost the first time, and this might sound a bit abstract and odd, but it was almost the first time that it kind of hit me that like these were average everyday people going about their average everyday lives, and they just had to kind of, you know, grit their teeth and bear through it kind of like we do. I mean, obviously they were in a lot harsher conditions than we are at the moment, but it was, you know, it was the first time hearing about the down-to-earth issues and intricacies of society, which really made me connect and think that, wow, these, you know, this isn't actually just a fairy tale. These people were really living on the Nile in these ancient times. And yeah, I don't know, it really just kind of blew me away a little bit.
Yeah, I suppose seeing the document you were talking about would have been quite a grounding thing. I don't know. It's hard to relate in any way to people from ancient times, but that's very interesting.
Because you think about the statistical data sheets which are put out by governments and organizations today. Actually, can we just cut a little bit?
Yes, sure.
So we'll start off with so you look at modern states and their statistical data sheets, and like what was happening in ancient Egypt, it was the same as, if not greater. So it's I was really impressed. I was quite impressed.
Very cool.
But anyway, so there you go.
Yes. I look forward to going to some of these places when I go there, and hopefully I can strike the balance of not getting museumed out, as you said. How have you been to any when I was in Europe a decent amount of time ago, the churches everywhere was the big thing that I got churched out. I feel like, because
you got churched.
You go to them and it's like amazing because it's like these hundreds and hundreds of year old churches, and you're like, wow, look at this. And then after about the 600 or 700-year-old church, you're like, all right, I get it.
Church.
Yeah.
I don't know. The church, we haven't actually really done as many churches as I think we probably could have. Just kind of the free churches every now and then that you can wander into. I'm not particularly churched out, but I'm definitely, after you go through like a medieval section in an art gallery and it's just the Jesus kind of in 17 different positions, that's a bit much. But anyway, moving on.
Speaking of ancient beliefs, Ron DeSantis. Am I saying that right?
So Ron DeSantis.
DeSantis, okay. He's running for, well, has just announced via a tweet, an interview with, what's his name?
Elon Musk.
Elon, that he will be running for president in 2024. Will, what are your immediate thoughts?
My immediate thoughts. So, has the thing been released? Because I'm not sure if it has. It might have.
It might.
I mean, you don't. Yeah, but anyway, so I'll give a bit of context to the viewers. So pretty much, it's very interesting. So Ron DeSantis, not to be confused with Ron Santos, who's a completely different guy. He's George Santos, very interesting, bizarre guy. But we'll park him later. So Ron DeSantis, he's kind of the main contender for Donald Trump, for the Republican nominee to be the next U.S. president. He's the governor of Florida at the moment. He kind of has a very obviously conservative Republican background. So he's liberalized gun laws. He's restricted, he's restricted like LGBT education in schools, and he's done a whole launch of other kind of more Republican things in Florida. But he's their governor, so that's what he's been elected to do. And he's been holding off on his announcement to run as president until today, when it will be happening. And the interesting thing is he's doing it in this thing called, I think it's called Twitter Spaces. And it's like this. I mean, I'd imagine it's kind of like a call like this, where him, Elon Musk, and this guy called Daniel Sachs will all be having a discussion. So Elon Musk and him will be discussing, and then Daniel Sachs will be moderating. And Daniel Sachs, if you don't know, because I had no idea who he was, he apparently is a kind of big tech guy who's closely allied with Musk, but also supports Ron DeSantis. So I don't know. It's interesting because it's the first time that this has ever happened. Of a mainstream politician announcing their bid to be president within the space exclusively of social media. I mean, what do you think?
My big question is kind of why? And I was actually today, just out of interest, not for the show or anything, I watched an interview with Elon Musk And as I thought, the interviewer was pretty crap, but he did bring up an interesting point. Elon Musk spending a lot of time upset about how advertisers don't want to advertise on Twitter and all this stuff, yet he's constantly saying very right-wing sort of things, and obviously he has a freedom to speech. He can say that's allowed, but having a big sook after that of when people don't want to advertise in front of that is a bit interesting. And I feel like this is just like, that doesn't seem like a very business smart decision, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of then the question is, well, is he actually endorsing Ron DeSantis? And the thing is, we don't really know. So, I mean, that's the thing with like all of it. It's just very odd.
Yeah.
Like, no one really knows. You know, is he endorsing? Is he just giving him a platform? Is the fact that he's platforming but not perhaps endorsing still mean that in reality he's endorsing, and in the fact he's brought along this Daniel Sachs guy who's a known supporter of DeSantis anyway? Is that just an endorsement? I mean, another theory is like, because it's on Twitter, and Trump doesn't really use Twitter anymore, because he has been allowed back on, but he uses his
Truth Social.
what's Trump's thing called?
Truth Social.
Yeah, Truth Social. So Trump only uses that, and then it's like, well, maybe, you know, Elon is trying to give DeSantis a larger Twitter base, which Trump might not have access to, just to bring him more support. I don't know. I mean, it kind of, what I think about it is, it's interesting that we're going further and further and further into this idea of politics, of politicians communicating through social media. And you look today at like most major politicians in the whole Western world and the Eastern world as well do a lot of their major announcements on Twitter. Ambassadors announce things, diplomats announce things, presidents announce things. All sorts of people, all up and down the political hierarchy, kind of relate really important official messages over Twitter into the world. They apologize for things, they invite people to things, and I don't know, personally, I'm not that much of a fan of that. I mean, maybe that's just my inner conservative coming out, but it just seems a bit like, I don't know, it seems a bit it seems a bit not disconnected. Maybe I'm the one being disconnected. It doesn't seem like authoritative. It doesn't seem authentic. It doesn't seem like official in a way that a state should be official.
I get what you're saying, but the fact is that they want to get their message out to as many people as possible, and at the moment that isn't television or a press conference or radio or anything like that. That is the internet, and
is Twitter.
People will share it, and if they agree with it, comment on it. And I think one of the great things about the internet, and obviously I'm not generally very pro it, if that's even, I don't know, a stance you can take, but is there's this real democratization of difference in opinion in a way that I've found that's interesting. And I feel like when someone makes an announcement, a politician makes an announcement on Twitter that, or Instagram or whatever, that a lot of people really agree with and really find meaningful, that can be shared, and that can be brought to more people in a interesting way, which means that connection between the politician and the individual, I feel like, could be higher than ever, almost. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. I haven't really thought about it like that, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. I suppose part of my worry is that, like before, with a press conference, or with putting something over like a state-run media organization like the BBC or the ABC, the government would put forward their position, the state-run media would then provide it to the media. Or in a press conference, they would, put forward their position, and then lots of different parties could put forward their idea. But with like with Ron DeSantis specifically going to the private company of Twitter and offering this information, the idea of private companies exclusively monopolizing on the spreading of government information like that. I suppose going into the future, that's what I worry about.
Yeah, of course. That's yeah. I have sort of a greater question about Ronald, for you, Will. And you are by no means on the same level of conservative that I would say. You're a different breed.
I'm probably, I would class myself as a Democrat.
Yeah. But watching a lot and reading a lot about him, I didn't know about him running his announcement for running for president until you text me about it just earlier. But in the past, a lot of what he's talking about is this indoctrination into a woke culture. What do you think he really means by that? Or what do you think like general American Republicans mean by an indoctrination into woke culture? Because I don't understand it, personally, really.
Well, it's this idea of a culture war, isn't it? Which is so prevalent within polarized politics of our current day, in regard to the idea that the left, like the intellectual, left-wing group, which in their eyes forms the establishment, is trying to, I don't know, just indoctrinate, control, and ultimately almost destroy what the right thinks culture should be. That's my best understanding of what they mean by, the woke indoctrination. And the right, the Republicans, they feel they have these conservative values, which rightly or wrongly, they're trying to hold on to, and which they feel the left are coming after and trying to take away from them. And so to defend against that, they almost, like with him in Florida in regards to gun laws and same-sex, marriage education and marriage laws and abortion laws, they're almost then taking those kind of things away from the left in response. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, because I was kind of confused, because it was like, well, if just because people, for example, the bill about discussing LGBTQ ideas in schools, the banning of that. I was wondering how people learning about something would like how that is an agenda, if you know what I mean. Like, what would the left benefit?
How does education
from just some people like they're not right? Maybe some people more would align with their values, but they don't have really anything to gain in terms of like a monetary value or anything like that. And I guess that's kind of what confused me. But what you're saying is it's more about they feel that their culture is being sort of taken away and changed, which I understand. And I think that, interestingly, if you want to have that culture, maybe there should be a place for you to go where it is more traditional. And maybe...
Damn. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is if you were in Florida and you vote and democratically voted someone who was going to put these things in place, you can't then, like... I guess you can, if you like that, then be in Florida. If you don't, you can move away. But if you have, like, a president, right, over the whole country who is putting these very strict things in place... I feel like then it's a lot more restricting, because it's not as easy to just leave the country. So maybe there should be like a hub for people to be able to go when they feel sort of attacked, where they can't, so that they're not taking away valuable experiences from people who want to live a more liberal life with more modern ideas of gender and abortion and all the things we talked about before. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one, because then it's the new children born
That's
into that area don't really have a saying, do
forms
they?
of a microstate.
Yeah.
Me listening to you, it's fascinating that you've even kind of put that idea forwards, because, I mean, more or less, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've almost suggested, like, I mean, a nation dividing against itself in regards to what culture should be, and then a group of people disagreeing with that culture, almost breaking away within that nation. Which is, I mean, a radical. I mean, I'm because you're just thinking ideas through, and it's kind of the conclusion you'd come to. But it is a really, I mean, that's how how the U.S. Civil War began. And as a moderate, as I hope we both are, it's saddening to me that you can't have overall politicians who are able to bring the nation together rather than divide it, and who can't merge those two different conservative and, say, liberal societal views on the world. You know, a good politician, a good president in my eye, would be able to unite the United States or any country of the two, you know, conservative and liberal people, to bring them together to function in a harmonious society. And you look at most countries around the world, and that's able to operate. Like, no one, you know, unless you're in some kind of crazy religious sect, no one really goes off and forms their own micro communes. But in the US, it's becoming more and more and more polarized. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I lean more towards Democrats than Republicans, is because Republicans and this kind of, you know, far right, well, not far right, but more right than center right, keep banging on about this cultural war and division and hatred. And, you know, I mean, Trump, you know, people who make their presidencies and their political careers off dividing people, division between people, should not, that's not the point of politics. And you look at Biden and you look at Obama, and it's like, sure, maybe they have a patchy economic record, sure, maybe they have some crazy left-wing views, but at least they can bring people together, and unite people.
I
don't know.
I know what you're saying, but like, this has been my ultimate worry, as a lefty cuck myself, is you get someone in the power of president, right? And then they put bills like in Florida through for the whole nation, and all of a sudden children like are learning about really valuable things, and for me, and I'm not an American, but things like, and not necessarily for children, but like people in their adolescence and that sort of stuff, learning about more like modern ideas of gender and modern ideas of sexuality, and even just sex education, full stop. I don't understand why you would risk bringing that to the entirety of America when you could just have it in a small section, and I feel like there'd almost be less division. And I know, like, again, you said this is how a civil war happened, but if instead of everywhere everyone's disagreeing, combating, there's never going to be any progress, and there's never going to be any stability for those who want it. So you're just sort of like fluctuating, and no one's ever really happy. Whereas if you had these like more traditional havens, and what that looks like, I couldn't tell you. You could have people still progressing and new ideas and this more like left-leaning areas. And it wouldn't affect in any way people who, well, it wouldn't affect as much people who don't value those same things. I don't know. It's it's hard.
I mean, I don't know. I would kind of argue that, like, that's already happening to an extent in the US. And if you go to Colorado or whatnot, and you can smoke weed, do what you want, and yada yada yada. But then you go to Florida, and you've got that more, or Alabama or whatever, you've got more conservative kind of things there. But then, so there's that division there within the state. But then obviously your problem is, well, what if a president comes in who puts things over all the whole country? And the thing is, I don't know how to answer that question, because I don't know the ins and outs of presidential power and when that overrides the states. But perhaps the solution to your problem, I mean, I don't know, would just be looking into those specific powers that the president would have over the states. Because I mean, you look at the whole Roe v. Wade case being overturned, and that's kind of an example of what you mean, I guess. But then, of course, that was in regard to the courts. So then, and of course, the courts are a lot more powerful in America, so you'd have to look at that as well. So I don't know, we've almost come to the conclusion that we don't know enough and we need to look into it more.
As we often do.
Yeah.
Anyway, it'd be interesting to follow that.
Anyway.
Moving on.
Yeah.
What was our next
The
thing?
budget.
The budget!
The budget's in.
Who's excited for the budget? Now,
woohoo!
I've taken what I've found to be kind of the most important points in the budget. I've also left out things that I don't particularly understand. So I'm sorry if you think, oh, why didn't you talk about this? Look, it's hard to read through statements from our government.
Economic jargon.
They don't make it easy. Maybe that's on purpose. Who knows? But so I've picked out sort of things that I think are positive, a couple of things that I think are negative, some things that I just think would be interesting to talk about as well.
Do you just want to explain to people that, so this is it yearly, the budget
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone's listened to our first ever episode. We talked briefly about the budget.
Oh, yeah.
That was technically the 2022 budget to 2023 budget, which is like that year-long period. And then this budget that was announced last week or the week before is 2023 to 2024. So it's not like... It's weird. It doesn't fit in with the regular year system or the... Oh no, it does fit in. It's the financial year, I guess.
Yeah, financial year. Yeah.
Okay, so things I want to start off with, and I want to just get your thoughts on each of these main things. A lot of it was very similar to last year, but the thing that I found like really positive from this budget was a focus on improving the life of single parents in this sort of cost of living crisis that we're living in. There were two big things. There is now a far less complex process for single mothers and fathers to access childcare financial support. So before, there was an extensive interview system, background checks, a lot of stuff that went into it. Now, there is still obviously checks that need to be done, but you can imagine having to spend weeks and weeks on getting financial support when you could otherwise be working would be quite difficult for a single parent. So now, I don't have the specifics here, but there isn't as extensive of an interview period, and there's a few less background checks and things like that, just to make it so not so much getting bogged down in the bureaucracy of it. The other thing is single parents got welfare support until their youngest was 8 years old before. Now they're getting welfare support until their youngest child was 18. Did I say 18 before? I meant 14, to say,
isn't it?
I meant to say 8. 14, it's the highest. It drops off after 14, but you still get some welfare after that.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, until 18.
After that. Okay, right.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on that, Will?
No, I mean, I'm broadly in favour of actually supporting single parents.
Yeah, it's not very interesting to talk about, but you know, I just thought.
No, I mean, that's fair enough. I don't know. I don't know the statistics. I don't know what it was like before. I don't know what it will be like afterwards. I don't know how many single parents are in Australia. But broadly, yeah, good on you, Albanese. Good on you, Jim Chalmers.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I have an overall kind of thought of the budget, which maybe I'll give after you finish listing your thing.
Yeah.
But keep going.
But moving from what I thought was a very positive thing to something I'm quite unsure about, which we briefly talked about off air yesterday, is there is now tax breaks for those who are building homes to rent out. So basically, if you're wanting to build a house not to live in, but to rent out to others, there is now significant tax breaks on the materials needed for that and the land needed for that and stuff like that. What are your thoughts to this one, Will?
Well, I mean, is that just a short-term fix to try help the housing crisis?
So the rationale behind it is there is a rental shortage in Australia at the moment. The idea being that people are often building houses, second houses, importantly, as holiday houses or as Airbnbs or something like that, rather than, which is technically different to renting it out, and are not letting other people, renters, stay in it, because there is a lot more insurance that is involved in renters living in it, a lot more maintenance that you have to legally do, sort of stuff like that. So for people that are super rich, it's more beneficial to just leave it empty or have infrequent Airbnbers in and out of it. The argument against that would be, well, shouldn't people that are building houses not be putting them up for rent, but having them to actually live in? Should we really be, in a time like this,
building second houses?
And it's easy to look at a landlord as a mum and pop that is renting out a house, but often, especially in Sydney and New South Wales, these are mega corporations that are building apartments to rent out. So then it's a bit of hypocrisy with a Labor government giving huge corporations tax breaks to build apartments that fall down within 10 years. So yeah, that's the sort of two sides. No, that's obviously an exaggeration, but they're yeah.
So is there kind of documented evidence of big corporations taking advantage of this and building massive rental apartments and then of not good quality? Or
there has been, I think there was actually there was a I don't know what's a state level royal commission. I don't know what that counts as, but
just an interstate royal commission,
because you have these mega corporations, and I can't think of the names off the top of my head. So they own entire suburbs basically and then rent them out, and there's been issues with they look all really nice and fancy, and nothing works, and there's been fire hazard issues with a lot of them and stuff like that. This is not so much in Perth or South Australia, but in New South Wales and
the East Coast.
Yeah, more the East Coast. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting rebut to the idea that these are people building houses to solve a rental crisis. And it's unclear whether this is permanent or if this is a temporary solution, but yeah.
Okay. Because my immediate response was we have a rental crisis, but I think overall we kind of have just a general housing crisis, and getting young couples and families kind of onto owning their own property and onto that property ladder. It seems to me encouraging the building of rentals and aiding more rentals is almost like a short-term fix, because surely there should be government incentive for building houses which people can buy outright to get onto the property ladder, rather than, that might be somewhere else in the budget, I don't know, but surely we should be looking at more of the long-term fix of getting people bought into their own properties onto the housing ladder, rather than kind of fluctuating around and around and around in all these rentals. But again, I don't know the economic ins and outs of it.
And the housing market in Australia is one of the biggest industries, really. If you want to get richer and you have the money, you should buy a second house and rent it out, really. Especially with this tax break. So a little bit of financial advice from Tiago there. Obviously not one that I can unfortunately take advantage of.
But actually, no, I'll ask you, Tiago.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be better then for the government to not put this tax break in, and for the big corporations to not take advantage of it in the long run? Would you rather that happen?
I would rather, well, ideally I'd like them to put similar tax breaks even more significant ones for people building houses to live in. Like, I don't see why that wouldn't be the immediate sort of go-to, but it might be more complicated than what I'm assuming, but it does seem a lot like this is a result of lobbying or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, do you think there is actually some sinister appeasement to these mega corporations you talk of?
I wonder if you, and I am sympathetic to Albanese, but I wonder if he wasn't to do this, or if he was to do something that would give the individual more of a right to have a home, then there would be certain powers at play that would do a large anti-Labour scare campaign afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah, who knows what the behind the scenes are of that. We just know what they've officially said, which is what I explained before. Coming back to another thing that I think is quite positive. This is just like a small little thing, but I thought it was nice. There's been a lot of pay rises for government, what's it called? The
Job seeker and Medicare.
Not government servants.
Civil servants.
Civil servants. Interestingly, the one that I've got here is and most significantly, there's been a 15% pay rise to aged care workers, which I think is great. They were like, in this country, we don't look after our elderly enough, and having people working that can take care of them on a larger pay, I think, is definitely necessary. And another thing, cost of living. One of the big ways they're tackling this year is with an energy rebate. So you get part of your power bill back every I don't know, month or so. Whenever, do you know how often you get a power bill?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. Interestingly,
per quarter?
Per quarter, that's it.
Every 3 months.
I'm not sure what the deal is then if you have like solar or something like that, when you're not getting your energy from the grid. There is rebates for installing solar, but interesting to think about. If you're going green, you're maybe not getting back. I mean, I guess you're not sending out as much money, but you're not getting the same benefits as someone who is I don't know. I don't know if that's actually relevant, but I thought a little thought in my head. And then finally, this one will be a little bit of fun to talk about. Increased tobacco price, increased tobacco tax. Again.
Oh yeah, I saw
which,
that.
You know, if you buy cigarettes, I don't know how you have any money left at this stage. And
like $50 a packet now.
That's pretty standard. $234 million put into combating vape. Another interesting thing. So, those two things were. What are your thoughts?
Look, I mean, combating vape, I'm all in favor for. I think a vape is a scourge of the earth. I think here's my vape thesis. I think the genuine, authentic, original idea of providing something without nicotine to get people off cigarettes had good intentions to start with. I was mostly in favor of that, generally, because I think smoking is bad. But now, especially in the last few years, vaping has become completely out of control and it's become its own luxury vice within its own right, with companies simply making money off damaging people's bodies through, fruity flavors, chocolatey flavors, big bright colors, aiming towards children. I mean, putting God knows what kind of chemicals in there, which, some studies say are similar to, if not worse than cigarettes. Their whole original idea has been completely destroyed. They're simply a money-making, disgusting. They're terrible for the environment. People throw them out all over the place. The industry is shrouded in mystery and doubt and probably lack of regulation. I mean, the whole thing is, I think, just one of the saddening moral, debaucheries of modern society. There's my vape rant. So, the more power to the government to obliterate the scum from the earth.
I believe I don't have the exact number here, but something like 160 million of that 234 million is going into education campaigns, which I think I've said many times on this podcast is the best way to tackle issues like this. Yeah.
The root cause.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the once again increased tobacco tax?
Smoking. I don't know. I mean, this might blow some holes in my vape rant, but smoking, like relaxation through smoking. I mean, okay, I'm against big corporations making money off destroying people's body through addictive substances. I think that's terrible. But the idea, and again, this is, quite higgledy-piggledy, but the idea of, like, every now and then indulging in some kind of, I suppose, tobacco-based product to relax or to calm yourself down, not in an addictive quantity, in a restrained quantity every now and then, I'm broadly in favor of. I think that's all right, because there is part of me which is like, belief in the independence of the individual and the right for the individual to choose how they want to relax and choose what they want to spend their money on. So I'm kind of a bit divided on that, but all in all, the cigarettes and the mass consumption of cigarettes and tobacco, which this kind of price hike would target, with that logic in mind, I suppose I would support.
Yeah, because I suppose if you're only indulging once and every now and again, it's not so bad having so much tax in it. But I guess that is the theory behind it. Same with like an alcohol tax, where you're not going to buy as much alcohol and binge as much if it's going to be more detrimental. And I think it's I think it's generally a good thing. I like the argument. Well, it's a little anecdote I heard on the Friendly Geordies podcast last week.
Yeah.
Of clearly a very, very lifelong old smoker had just bought a packet of cigarettes, and her friend said to her, "Oh, my taxes are going to pay for your medical bills after when you die of lung cancer." And she says, "You see how much I have to pay for a packet of cigarettes? My taxes are going to be paying for my own medical bills. Thank you very much." So, that kind of makes sense. Like, if you're going to smoke, you're more likely to get sick, and all the tax dollars that you paid on all those packets of cigarettes is going to pay for your recovery.
Because I've often heard people get quite frustrated with the fact that their tax is going towards people who are dying from smoking illnesses in hospital. So I wonder this would be a very nerdy kind of statistical thing to do, but if someone could find out the quantity of money going from ordinary people's taxes or the tax on cigarettes in relation to the people who are getting medical help from dying from smoking. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway.
Okie dokes. Shall we wrap up with some G7 bonanza?
G7. So, I'll do a little. But actually, no. Well, I mean, a little bit more on the budget. They were also in surplus, weren't they?
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, that was quite incredible. I don't think anyone expected that.
No.
And it seems like we're now beyond, at least in Australia, the peak of inflation. So that by 2024-2025 budget, it will just be like 3.5% compared to the 6% we have for 2023-2024. So that's quite good. But yeah, anyway, so G7. So for those who don't know, the G7 is a yearly meeting of the 7 wealthiest democratic nations in the world. So currently the G7 is made up of France, Britain, Canada, the US, Japan, and Germany. So quite an eclectic kind of, Asian, European, American mix there. It used to be the G8, because Russia used to be there, but then they did their original invasion of Ukraine, or Crimea, and then they were kicked out. And so the G7 this year was hosted in Hiroshima by the Japanese Prime Minister. And yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was mostly, the theme was standing up to China and Russia. So Zelensky was invited, he kind of took almost center stage. You see all those pictures of him walking around shaking people's hand, and Rishi Sunak patting him on the back. And I think the Americans have now actually put forward a pledge to contribute fighter jets to Ukraine, and I know Poland's doing the same. But the interesting thing about the G7 now is, like, so back in 1990, the fall of the Berlin Wall, end of the Cold War, democracy was all prevalent throughout the world. The G7 had just over 50% of global GDP. Now they're those 7 nations are now just under 30% of global GDP. So you can, it's interesting to see that the rise of China, the kind of rise of India and Brazil, that dominance of the G7, that those democratic values is kind of waning. Which is why this time they actually invited Australia, India, Brazil, South Korea, Vietnam, the Comoros Islands, who kind of represented the African Union, and also the Cook Islands, who represented the Pacific Islands Forum. So it's interesting that, and that was the Japanese prime minister specifically who invited all those people. So it's interesting that the G7 is having to expand and invite all these new people to kind of counter that threat of Russia and China. I don't know. What do you make of that?
We're speaking, like, just historically, and I was doing a little bit of background research into this, but there was a time recently where we had a G20, if I'm not mistaken.
That keeps going.
But an issue with that is obviously it is involving China and Russia in the G20, and I was wondering why. I mean, obviously at this G7, a lot of the talk was around Russia and China, and not in an overly positive way for understandable reasons. But why, if we're struggling to have this power within the G7, why don't we set something up more like the G20 rather than having this like weird thing of like, oh, we have inviting the G7 people here, but Australia's invited if they want to come. I don't really understand that.
I don't know. I think at the moment, France, Britain, Canada, USA, Japan, Germany still have enough clout and power to hold sway without officially adding, making it the G15 or the G12 or whatever. I mean, the other thing is it would be difficult because India, Brazil, South Africa, I mean, they're not really democratic to the extent, I would argue, or to that kind of wealthy extent that the G7 currently are. So if you expanded it, it would go beyond what the G7's currently defined as, I guess. But with the current, geopolitical changes in the world, it looks like something like that will probably have to happen. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. But and whether or not anything actually comes from their meetings and all of that good stuff, we'll have to wait and see.
Yes, we will. Very interesting, these meetings between different countries at the moment. We talked about AUKUS a few episodes ago, talking about G7 now. A lot of talk about Russia and China. Do you think that it is a purely talking about Russia in the fact of a defense of Ukraine, China in idea of defense of Taiwan, or do you think this is a more sort of global fear that we have for these two nations?
I'd say it's more of a global thing. I think those G7 countries are freaking out because China and Russia are now interfering in spheres of influence where they usually held sway. So I think China's recently signed a deal with the Solomon Islands, and I'm not sure whether or not they're going to start building a military base there. And then, you look at China and Russia throughout Africa, you look at China throughout South America. I mean, these are regions where US used to be dominant, where Britain and France used to be dominant, where Japan used to be dominant. So I think, the worry about Taiwan, the worry with Ukraine, the West have suddenly had a wake-up call and are realizing, all right, we need to get our act together if we want to keep these authoritative people out of these areas. And then it's like, okay, well, you can look at that from like your shiny Western liberal elite view, like we kind of are, or you can look at it from a very cynical geopolitical realpolitik thing of just nation versus nation trying to get power. But anyway. So yeah, should we call it a day there then?
Yeah, we're just at an hour right now, actually.
Very good.
The actual podcast will be a little bit shorter.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fence Sitters.
Indeed.
If you enjoyed and if you like what you heard today, consider subscribing, leaving a comment. Sharing with a friend always helps. We're on Spotify, YouTube. The first episode's on SoundCloud if you're, I don't know, for some reason, only listen to podcasts on SoundCloud. We would really appreciate your support. And special announcement to make, not a positive one, unfortunately. I may have claimed that we might talk about Voice to Parliament in the next episode, but because we want to do this properly, and Will is gallivanting about Europe, we're going to hold off for a little bit longer. But that's all the more reason to keep listening.
I don't exactly have time. Exactly. It'll come.
It'll come. It will come. And, there's ages until we actually vote on it, so, you've got time to get yourself educated.
Yeah, surely we release the episode after the referendum. Oh, dear.
All right,
anyway,
any closing statements,
alrighty, well, that's
William?
all from us then. No, I'm all good.
All right. We'll see you all next week.
Au revoir.
And to get hot, I got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Ukraine.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.